Alright, let's get right into this haves and the have-nots review. The season finale was last night. Lots of action was in there, and we have a return date for the show. It's January 6th, so we know when the show is coming back, and that's a good thing, so that we know exactly when it's coming back so we can mark our calendars. So the show starts out with Jim and Celine arguing about their son. Jim wants to know how Carlos knew that Jim is his father. And Celine dances around it. I think obviously she told him because that would be in her nature to do that. But she says, do you think he didn't wonder when he was growing up why he didn't look like his other siblings? And she says that he remembers Jim holding him when he was a little boy. So I think she told him though. But basically Jim thinks that Carlos wants some money. And Celine says it's not about money, he only wants your time. But Jim's not buying it. He just said Carlos is not getting a dime. And Celine is just like, she gets indignant. She's like, I've never asked you anything, I've never demanded anything from you. And I'm like, well, what was that all about earlier in the season with you asking him for a check? I need my check. She bugged him about it almost incessantly. And last week, Catherine made it clear that they have an arrangement with her to keep her under employment. So something is up there, so I'm not sure. I was kind of thrown by that. I'm not sure what that was all about, but okay. And so before Celine goes off in a huff, she says, I know everything you've done, Jim, so don't push me. So she's got stuff over his head that she can use, so. And she's obviously not happy at all, so Jim's gonna have to watch out for her next season, I think. So on from there we go to the Young house, and this was the only interaction we saw with the Youngs in this episode. Candace is still at Hannah's house, and Hannah's like, you're still here, and Candace is saying, well, I'm waiting for Benny to let me out of here, because Benny's like, he didn't really want to let her leave, and so he's sort of like the protective older brother, so he wouldn't let her leave out of there. And they have their Hannah and Candace have their conversation, and basically Hannah does not believe that her grandbaby is dead. And she says, I don't know where he is, but I'm going to find him. And so I think the scene sort of indicated they might be inching towards some sort of to reconciliation between Hannah and Candace or at least them being more conciliatory. Because Candace kind of made her remark like, shouldn't you be reading the Bible? And then Hannah goes on to list all these biblical chapters and says, you need them all. And the expression from Candace is like it's like she's thinking about maybe that she does need that, maybe she does need to clean up. I got that little vibe from there. It wasn't anything big, but maybe like that Candace does kind of want to turn around, or at least be better and sort of like be in a better place with her mother, at least, and all that. Obviously they're not going to totally clean Candace up, because she's the antagonist, so. Okay, and from there we head to the campaign office, and Maggie is getting fresh with David again. She's giving him this pocket square for a suit, saying it'll look good with it. And Jim comes in, and he wants Carlos fired. And Maggie wants to know why, but Jim doesn't tell her. He just says, just fire him. So she just says, okay. And here comes Veronica. She's got her smirk on, like it's a kind of a sinister smirk, like because last time she really interacted with David, she thought that he had cheated on her with Maggie, because she saw them coming out of his hotel room together. And so Maggie tells Veronica, maybe you should wear something to coordinate with your husband at the announcement. And Veronica, she doesn't want to hear anything Maggie has to say, and Maggie's like, well, you're not the first possessive wife I've dealt with. And Veronica says, well, I will be the last. So she shuts her down right there like that. And so Jim and Maggie give David and Veronica some alone time, and Veronica just says she's there to let him know that Catherine's having a party. And he says, well, you could have called me on the phone to tell me that. And she said, no, you always announce your presence in person when there's a seducing whore around. And obviously she's talking about Maggie. Veronica has some very interesting lines. She gets, out of all the characters, she gets the best lines, I think. Veronica, she doesn't believe that David did not mess around with Maggie. She just is not buying it. And she tells him, don't come home. He asks her about Jeffrey's car, and obviously still that's a no from her. She's not giving up that car. It's her trump card into making Jeffrey walk the straight and narrow line. And so from there we get right into the mansion party at the Priors. And Catherine is with Veronica, and Veronica's complimenting Catherine on how good the table looks. And Catherine says something like, well, Celine sets a lovely table. And Veronica wonders why Celine is still working there, but Catherine, she's not going to get into it because there's a whole lot of mess there, and Catherine don't want to discuss it. That's all there is to it. So Jeffrey and Melissa arrive, and she introduces Melissa as his date, and Catherine doesn't have any reaction because she kind of reacted a couple of episodes ago when Veronica told her that Jeffrey would be bringing a date to the party, because she kind of like when she said she told her about the date, and she's like, well, she's a lovely girl, and Catherine was like, she, and kind of gave this eye roll like, who are you fooling, Veronica? Come on! And so, but the person that did act surprised was Jeffrey's buddy Wyatt, because he came in, and when he's like looking confused, like, what the? And so him and Jeffrey have their little conversation off to the side where Veronica can't hear. And Wyatt's like, well, I know you're doing this for me, thank you. Well, it's not really, Jeffrey's not really doing it for Wyatt. He's doing it to keep himself out of jail because he doesn't want to go as an accessory, and that's exactly what Veronica threatened to do to him. She did not threaten him with jail time for Wyatt. She threatened Jeffrey with direct jail time for being an accessory. So that is what Jeffrey fears the most, and why he is walking the straight and narrow line. And when David arrives, he's not having any of this. He's just as like, outside. He wants to talk to Jeffrey outside. Veronica tries to come, but David says, I want to talk to my son alone. So they go outside and talk alone, and David's like, what are you doing, Jeffrey? You're gay. What are you doing with a girl? You're going to ruin this girl's life. Don't do this. Just stop. Jeffrey is saying, but Mom wants me to. David is, I don't want to hear about your mother. I don't want to hear that. You're uncomfortable. You can't do this. And David calls Veronica in, and she's like, I knew you'd need me. As only she would say, and delivered only as she could deliver such a line. And he's trying to get her to back off. He's trying to get her to back off, but she's not about to back off. He said Jeffrey is gay, and her face is like that, and she still don't want to accept it, and so basically it's just a conversation that goes nowhere. So they go back inside, and from there we get Amanda comes into the picture, and she's waiting for Quincy. And Wyatt's like, what are you doing? And she says, I'm waiting for somebody. So the doorbell rings, and she goes and gets the door for Quincy. Everybody's in nice clothes. Quincy comes in his streetwear, beanie, big coat, just looking like he's walking to the liquor store to get a 40. Awkward moment. At first, she introduces him and says that they're dating, and Quincy's just vulgar about it. Vulgar, ghetto, ignorant, everything. And it's just a mess. And Jim wants to speak to him privately, so they go into his study to talk. And they get into it right from there. Jim's like, I don't want you around my daughter. And so Quincy's like, you've been hitting my chick. And Jim's like, I don't hit women. And he says, and Quincy gets more plain about it. He's like banging, screwing, sex. And Jim tries to get a word in edgewise, but Quincy like takes him down. He gets him in a headlock. He gets him down on the floor and is just driving on his face like this. He's just driving on his face, and he messed up his face real good because Jim had bruises all over his face. And they in the other room, everyone hears the commotion, and David is able to get in and break up the commotion. And so Quincy runs out the house, and Amanda's like, "What did you do?" Oh, and but before, let me get that. Let me rewind back. I missed something a little bit before that. Before they went to the study, Amanda almost dropped out Jeffrey's secret in front of everybody because she said, "Well, if he can date somebody that's all wrong for him, why can't I?" And so, but that was before they went to study. But I had to back up and mention that because I thought that was a good line. And so back to Quincy leaving the house. And so Quincy drops another bomb, and he says, well, your father's been with Candace. And Amanda's like, what? And we know way back in the first season that Wyatt had already sort of put out there that Jim was messing around with Candace, but Amanda didn't believe it. And so Jim lies and everything and says that he's never been with Candace, but Amanda isn't believing it because she knows that he was at their apartment at one time and it didn't make sense, and she's sort of putting things together. She says when Candace would come back from studying with him that she smelled his cologne on her. Wow. So, and Amanda didn't believe it, so she goes in the house, and because Quincy has no reason to lie about that. Jim says he lied because he's a convict, but Quincy would have no reason to lie about something like that. That doesn't even make sense why he would lie about that. So that was that scene at the choir mansion. That was a whole lot of action. And so from there we go back to the Sarandon Hotel, and Maggie's in the lobby playing piano, drinking, ready to get fresh again. She says, I can't be responsible for what I say because I've been drinking. So she's drinking her wine and everything, and she starts asking David questions, saying that she can read through lies. And because David says he's happy, and she says, you're not happy. I can tell. And she asks him about his son, what his secret is, and that's not something he's going to share. She asks him why his wife is such a B-word, and he says, she's not that, she's not that. And she still says that David is lying. And finally, she asks him one question that she gets the truth out of him, and she says, are you jealous of Jim? He's this all-American white man running for governor. And even though there's an African-American president, this state is not ready for an African-American governor. Are you jealous of Jim? And he says, no, I'm very comfortable in my skin. And she says, that was a truthful answer. And she says something like, his skin is beautiful or something. She's been real fresh, very, very fresh. And so she's back into this like, okay, and she asked him, the last question she asked him, did you want to sleep with me that night that she came on to him before? And he's like, I love my wife. That don't answer the question, David. And he don't want to answer the question, and she knows the truth. And so they get back into this. It's just like she's being fresh again. She's drunk and fresh, and she even gets she's gotten a little fresh even when she hasn't been drunk. So there is that. And so from there we transition back to the Pryor house, and Jim is in bed with Catherine. She's like, "What are you doing in this bed?" Because most of the time I believe he sleeps somewhere else. And he said, "I would have been sleeping if you didn't snore so loud." He's always saying something mean to Catherine. He's just so mean to Catherine, but she can dish it, she can hand it back to him, so it's all good. Okay, and so he gets a text, and he gets a text because we hear his phone vibrate. It goes, and Catherine says, "Tell your whores not to call here at night." So he looks at his phone, and I can't see what the text said, but it said something. And I guess it was like, "Come outside," because Jim goes downstairs, and he goes outside, and he looks around. And all of a sudden, this whole flock of thugs just runs up to him, and they grab him, and they put him in the trunk just like the Malones did to Candace. And he's like, I'm a judge, I'll have your aid for this." And I like, well, at this point, Jim, you ain't having nobody's aid for this, because they got you in the trunk and they are in control. So Candace's orders have been carried out. Jim is in some serious trouble. All right, but from there we go back to David and Maggie, and they're sort of like in the hallway. Maggie's drunk. David's drunk, but not as drunk as Maggie. He still kind of keep his senses about him, his dignity about him, his integrity about him. He tells Maggie no about coming to her room, and she says, "Well, I'm going to leave my door unlocked again, the adjoining door unlocked." And what happens from there is she goes to her room, and David goes to his room. And so he's trying to pull himself back from temptation. So he picks up the phone and calls Veronica. And he's like on the phone like an AA. He's like an AA member on the phone trying to call their sponsor when they're looking at a drink, and they're desperately trying to get a hold of their sponsor, and they're not getting a hold of it. Veronica lets the phone ring and ring and ring. She's like getting ready to turn in for the night. She sets the alarm on the front door, and she looks at the phone. She sees it's David's cell calling. She lets it ring and ring and ring. She doesn't answer it, so obviously doesn't want to hear from David right now. She's pissed about what she thinks happened. So what happens next is David finally just hangs up the phone, and he tries to like lay down and sort of like I think he's trying to cool himself off so he doesn't do something he regrets. So he finally stands up and he looks at that adjoining door. He hears the other side unlock. He hesitates for a second, and finally he unlocks the door. He opens it. He waits a little bit more. Then he opens the other door and goes into Maggie's room. That's one of the cliffhangers, so we don't know if something really is going to happen, but it looks like something might happen. So Veronica just might have pushed her husband into Maggie's room. Alright, and so the final scene was Amanda. This is the big cliffhanger. Amanda with her gun. She gets the gun. She goes in, points it at Wyatt. Goes in, points it at Catherine. She wash, rinse, repeat. She does this a couple of times. Finally, the scene just sort of it goes back and forth, and we see her just like running back and forth down the hall at top speed. It's just like her going back and forth doing this repeatedly. And finally we get an exterior shot, and we hear and see a gunshot. That's how it ends. So somebody in the Pryor house got shot. I don't know who it's going to be. It's going to be interesting to see who got shot next season. We got a lot of months to wait for the next season, but I think The storylines have been set up well for the next season. So, thanks for watching this review. I appreciate it, and we'll see you next season for more The Haves and the Have-Nots. Deuces.